Pokemon Champions comes out April 8th, but we already know a bit more about some buffs to moves in the game. Dragon Claw is now considered a slicing move, which means it gets boosted by Sharpness. This turns the 80 base power move into 120 base power, just as strong as Outrage without locking you in or even picking a random target when it comes to VGC. This also applies to other claw moves like Shadow Claw. We also have another update on the speed of Mega Evolution versus switching, and it's not what you think. So let's get right into it. Okay, so let's talk about the speed of Mega Evolution and how it interacts with switching. So previously, we had stated that based on videos, Mega Evolution happens before switching, and then more videos in the same video, I mentioned that Mega Evolution and switching may be in the same priority bracket because we saw at some points a faster Pokemon switching out before a slower Pokemon was able to Mega Evolve, and we saw a faster Mega being able to Mega Evolve before a slower Pokemon switched out. And then a video came out of Slowbro and Dragonite both fighting each other, and Slowbro Mega Evolving first. We're like, okay, that maybe cuts that out. But then people said, okay, timid, max speed Slowbro, speed ties with relaxed nature, no investment Dragonite. So maybe it was a speed tie. So myself and many others weren't satisfied with that. So I asked my friend Seabad, who was at PAX East, to test two Pokemon Mega Evolving and let me know. So he Mega Evolved a Sableye, which was Keen-Eye. Now this is very important. It was not Prankster, so it was not going for a priority move on Will-O-Wisp upon Mega Evolution, and a Mega Gengar. And Mega Sableye Mega Evolved first before Gengar, and then Gengar attacked first, obviously because Gengar is faster. Now, even if you go timid max speed Sableye at 112 speed and relaxed nature Gengar, the minimum speed Gengar hits is 117. Now, if there was IVs in the game, which we're pretty sure they're not, it would hit 103, and it would make sense that Mega Sableye would outspeed Gengar, but no, we're pretty positive there are no IVs in this game. So what I'm basically telling you is that there's a few things that could happen here. One, Mega Evolution is completely random. Which would be crazy if that also counts with switches as well. We don't know enough information about that. Two, it could just be port priority as well, which opens up its whole other can of worms. I'm more so interested if the Mega Evolution versus the switching is still in the same bracket, if it's still based on speed, and if it actually is random. And I guess at this point, we're just not going to know until Pokemon Champions. They could also just be trolling us, which I think would be absolutely hilarious from the Pokemon Company. But obviously, let me know your thoughts down below. Now, this is where things get fun for me. We do know now that Shadow Claw and Dragon Claw are both Sharpness boosted, meaning Shadow Claw becomes a 70 base power move to a 105 base power move, and Dragon Claw goes from 80 to 120, effectively being the exact same thing as Outrage, like I said in the intro, without having to lock yourself in. Well, when it comes to Shadow Claw and Pokemon with Sharpness, the only Pokemon we have with that is Gallade. And I honestly feel like that doesn't make any sense. Why would they buff Shadow Claw if they were going to give it to Gallade? However, we do have Mega Absol Z now as a Pokemon in the game. And Mega Absol Z, unlike Mega Absol, is Dark and Ghost. And prior to, I guess, this gen, or we don't even know, it doesn't learn Poltergeist, right? It doesn't learn Poltergeist as far as we know. And the only Ghost moves it has are Phantom Force, Shadow Claw, Shadow Ball, I guess, too. But you're not going to use that. You're a physical attacker on this one, right? This is a clear physical attacker. And Shadow Sneak. If this does end up getting Sharpness, which is what we're kind of leading to believe, that Mega Absol Z would get Sharpness, its Shadow Claw is now 105 base power, giving it an actually good stab to use. I'm sure you could find some use for Phantom Force in VGC, but in singles, I'm sorry, my Pokemon with 60 defense is not going for, it's not coming out with that 154 base attack and then not attacking that first turn, as I'm clearly going to switch into a Pokemon that can deal with it. So Shadow Claw actually gives it a nice little buff, as well as top of the fact that it obviously has Night Slash, right? So it already has two moves that would be boosted by Sharpness. So having Sharpness will give it a nice solid way of hitting Pokemon that resist Dark, like Fairy types. As you can see, Sharpness boosted Shadow Claw. I do have Sharpness here, but it doesn't affect Shadow Claw currently in the calc, so I just made Shadow Claw 105 base power. We'll be doing 68 to 81% to a Pokemon like Max HP Primarina. And then on the more defensive end, Defensive Clefable, this is more so in singles than in doubles. You do 43 to 51, considering you can obviously SD up to +2. This is good damage. And I mean, even Adamant has its place with 95 to 111. And the reason I'm even entertaining Adamant is because of the fact that you have moves like Shadow Sneak, which would give you priority. And then, of course, you can couple this with your close combat. So in the Pokemon Legends ZAOU metagame, which is basically a metagame on where we're at Pokemon Showdown, where you could actually use these Pokemon in a battling setting, Mega Absol, we had actually given it Technician for moves like Pursuit, which were in that game, as well as Shadow Sneak. In that game is in that mode on Showdown, not actually in ZA. So this is just a nice little buff to actually make its moves stronger. And I just want to say that they're 105 base power, which is not a weak move by any means. On top of that, though, they have high critical hit ratios, right? So, like, they have a higher chance of getting a crit upon switch. How many times have you been ruined by a crit? So even a Pokemon like Clefable, which could take 2 of these Shadow Claws raw, might not be able to take it if one of them crits, or even if Night Slash crits as well upon switch or anything like that. And it does have moves like Iron Tail as well. But this is one of the buffs that I'm kind of excited for, and I'm pretty positive Homie's going to get Sharpness, because why would you ever... Why would you ever make these Sharpness boosted if you weren't going to give the Ghost type that's physical, that premieres in this game on a competitive point, Sharpness? So here's where things get fun and a little bit more wishful thinking. I am, and of course, stay with me on this. And if you're not, let me know your thoughts. Now, Dragon Claw also gets boosted. So there's a few dragon types that have been introduced in Pokemon Legends GA, and they're coming in Pokemon Champions. Obviously, Mega Feraligatr is one of them, but they gave it the ability Dragonize, which gives it that 1.2 times. It makes your normal moves Dragon, and it gives it that 1.2 times boost, right? So why would you boost Dragon Claws or Sharpness move if you're going to give this thing Dragonize instead of Sharpness? Because I guess, Sharp Teeth. So that leads us to believe, okay, what Pokemon makes sense that could potentially get Sharpness as their thing? And obviously, Mega Garchomp Z makes sense, especially with Mega Absol having Sharpness. But then they made it a special attacker, right? It's 141 versus 130. It's a great mix attacker. Don't get me wrong. It's a great mix attacker. And obviously, in Pokemon Legends ZA, it does have access to Nasty Plot as well. And I want to make a point on this because Mega Frostless also has Nasty Plot, but we didn't know if it would get it in Pokemon Champions. However, I'm wrong about that. In the Wolfie Glick video, we actually see him going through Mega Frostless's move pool, and we do see Nasty Plot there. So it's pretty safe to infer that, like, at least Nasty Plot on Pokemon like that, Pokemon like Mega Garchomp, and then, or Assume rather, and Pokemon like, hopefully Greninja, also get Nasty Plot as well. But if they're giving a Nasty Plot, would they still give this Mon Sharpness? And I mean, if they did, obviously Dragon Claw would be boosted, and then of course there was Mega Baxcalibur, which could get that as well. But I mean, it feels really weird to give it to Mega Baxcalibur when Glaive Rush is the same thing, right? It's 120, and obviously the drawback is that you take double the damage until the next turn. And then why would you give it that? Why would you give it a better move, aka more PP? You give it more PP and no drawback on that. I feel like that doesn't make as much sense for Mega Baxcalibur. So I have some wishful thinking. I do think that Garchomp could potentially be it, which would be really interesting considering it is a really good mix attacker. But obviously Dragon Claw would be extremely strong. But then that kind of takes away from the other Mega Garchomp, right? Which they could retcon that and give it that. And that's kind of what I'm going towards with this, that they're ending up changing a few. Like, I kind of expect Mega Gallade to get Sharpness, or I hope, it's all wishful thinking again. Let me know your thoughts. Like, this is all what I want as a Pokemon fan. But I started looking at Mega Sceptile, I'm like, this Pokemon has a lot when it comes to Sharpness, and obviously it has base 110 attack versus base 145 special attack, but like, they're never going to give this thing Draco Meteor, right? Because you become Mega Sceptile upon Mega Evolving. You're not the dragon, prior, so you can't give it to that Pokemon. Well, you could. They could do whatever they want, their Pokemon. But Mega Sceptile has a lot of moves potentially boosted by Sharpness, right? Leaf Blade is boosted, Night Slash is boosted. I guess if you want to go a little bit more memeier, you have Fury Cutter and X-Scissor as well that are also boosted by Sharpness. But giving it a Dragon Claw that's 120 base power without having to worry about being locked in, I think is a pretty big buff for this Mon. I think that'd be a really nice one, especially on the physical side. You have your Night Slash for Air Balloon Golden Go. Obviously, Earthquake could do it too, and if you want the Steel types. You have your Leaf Blade, which is super boosted now. Like, this is a 135 base power move coming off of, base 110 attack, but when you have this speed, and of course you have your Dragon Claw, which would be 120. And now we've tried several sets with Mega Sceptile on the channel. We've done Swords and Scale Shot when it got Shed Tail. We tried Shed Tail as well in the National Dex tier. I just think this is a really cool buff that Mega Sceptile can get. And if you look at Sceptile, it looks sharp as hell. Look at pointy. So that's kind of like, again, wishful thinking and what I'm thinking. But part of the fun of having the information that we do is, figuring out where it can be applicable, like where we can apply it and go over that. Like, I mean, some of the most fun with Pokemon is the theory modding prior to the actual game coming out. So I do want to know your thoughts on that. Lastly, I just wanted to mention about the producer of Pokemon Champions, basically saying that we're hoping that Pokemon Champions is here to stay, even if there's like 10,000 species of Pokemon, and they'll be doing balancing and which I think the thing about balancing is what really, you know, speaks to me here, right? How do you feel about potentially Pokemon Champions being the hub of VGC even like 10 years in the future, if you're, you know, still going to be playing Pokemon or VGC around that time? Me personally, it'd be really interesting to see like a game like Gen 10 or Gen 11, Gen 12 come out and look, you know, amazing, and then Pokemon Champions still look like the same game that it did forever. But at the same time, I guess you could still battle at least casually in those games if you really wanted to. But I think the big thing is the fact that they said they'll always work on proper balance, and I think that is huge because previously when you got changes, they always happen between generations. For instance, in Generation 5, Scoliped's release, it had 90 base attack, which was absolutely nothing. But if you go to a later generation, I'm just going to put Legends ZA just to make it easier. Scolipede has base 100, right? Like, we've seen them work on stats. We've seen them nerf and buff moves. Look at Dark Void. We've seen them do a whole lot of things. We've seen them nerf Pokemon like Cresselia stats. So not having to wait between generations for this to happen, and then you see, oh, wow, Snubbull is #1 on usage because Intimidate Snubbull is so broken. What should we do? Oh no, let's lower its defense by 5, you heartless creature. But yeah, so it's just things like that I get kind of excited for, because balance patches is definitely something that I wish we had in Pokemon more often. But let me know your thoughts down below. And yeah, that's all I have for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.